So you want to build a nation, you want to take your league to the very top of European football, but you've got no idea where to begin. Let's see if we can help with that. So this video is essentially going to be like two videos in one. The first part of which is introducing my Building a Nation save over in Malta with Sirens FC, which of course you can find live over on Twitch probably right now, right after you've watched this video. But for now, let's just say 10 AM UK time. So head on over after you've watched this video. There will of course be recap videos chronicling each season of the save, which will go live on this channel right as we start each transfer window. So look out for those. The other part of the video is explaining how exactly you go about doing a Building a Nation save, working through all the different tips and tricks I've picked up over doing these saves over the last few game cycles. I didn't say I was good at it, but I've done it a lot. I'll also be detailing towards the end of the video all the changes that have been made to make this possible in Malta, and there's some very interesting stuff in here. So if you like the editor, then stay tuned for that, because this time around for Malta, we'll be using a special custom database that obviously firstly adds the Maltese leagues to be playable in the game, but it does a hell of a lot more than that, with the aim of creating, in theory, the perfect environment in which you can build a nation, where the game world and the things around you actually scale correctly as you build your nation up, and that's something that's been missing from a lot of the previous attempts at this. We'll circle back around to the database stuff later in the video, but there's some stuff in there that you're not going to want to miss. To give you a little teaser, a proper dynamic TV revenue system, not like the one that was introduced in FM24, which sort of doesn't really do a lot. This is a proper one, so we'll get back to that. And I'll put this up front so you don't have to go digging through the video trying to find that part. The database that we're using, the exact one, is going to be linked in the description of this video, so if you want to play in this exact database, then you absolutely can do. That's the whole point of this as well. So what you do, get it, whack it in your editor data folder, then when you go to start your new career, it should appear up here, and you just select it. Make sure you only have one of them selected, and then that should be absolutely fine. Then you should be able to load Maltese leagues without a problem. But in addition, if you actually want to play along with this exact save, I've also put in the exact save file that I'm using in the description too, so you can start on, I guess, the same exact game world as me, obviously with Janos Toth as the manager. Big old Janos. Not entirely sure why bro's face isn't showing up here. Maybe he's a ghost. So what is a Building a Nation save? So for me, the aim of a Building a Nation save has always been to get the league that you're managing in to the very top of the UEFA coefficient charts, which is this thing right here. And what this does is it measures the performances of teams from each league in European competitions over the course of a season. I know the same name is often used when talking about saves trying to build up a national team, but that is not what I'm talking about here. The coefficients award teams points for winning matches in various European competitions, as well as certain rewards for progressing through different rounds. These points are then added up and then divided by the number of teams that that particular nation had in Europe that season, and that's how you end up with these numbers that you're seeing over here. Those results are then tracked over a 5-year period to create a rolling coefficient number, which is what this is now sorted by. So these are the current coefficients. Ignore this one right now, that's taking into account the current season. But to boil it down, the better the teams in your league do, the more points they earn, which is then moving them up the rankings, and therefore they are credited with more qualification spots for European competitions. It's the difference between England having 7 here and, well, Malta having 4, but only 1 in the very first round of the Champions League. Takes a little while, although, as I'm sure you've seen in your saves, England can sometimes end up with a lot more than 7. So you might then think, okay, cool, I'll make my team in my league, I'll make them really dominant, we'll go on and win 5 consecutive Champions Leagues, move up the rankings, blammo, number 1, success. Wrong. Even if you were to win the Champions League 5 years in a row, the chances of your league cracking the top 5 or 6 is probably slim to none, just because the other teams in your division would be weighing you down so much that your points would be diluted into basically nothing. I mean, not nothing, you'd probably be top 10, but that's about it. You have to find a way to improve the entire league that you're managing in, whilst only ever managing a single club. And that is where the real fun begins, if you're a psychopath like me. I've done saves like this in each of the last 3 FM game cycles and got one step closer to the goal with each. First with Norway, we got them up to 4th, but that was extremely difficult because of some of the domestic squad reg rules. In Ireland with Treaty United, we got them all the way up to 3rd in the coefficients, and then last year we got MTK Budapest and Hungary all the way up to 2nd in the coefficient charts, but couldn't quite crack England. This is my FM23 save with MTK that I've ported over just so I can show you a proper example of that. You can see that with Hungary, we got them all the way up to 2nd here, and if it wasn't for this season here, where we absolutely, well, shat the bed, quite frankly, we'd have been right on England's coattails going into the season that technically this save is currently in. We were so bloody close to getting them, as close as I've ever been. We were 2nd for a good 7 or 8 years in this save. That's how much we were able to establish ourselves, and in that we won the Champions League on 6 different occasions, including reaching the final on a further 5 occasions. We also had 3 different Hungarian sides win the Europa League in this save, as well as 3 others reach the final on different occasions. We also had 2 2 Hungarian sides win the Europa Conference League, as well as 9 different times they reached the final of it as well. To give you an idea of the success that actually can be had, it was far and away the most success I've ever seen in one of these types of saves. For me personally, obviously. Point being, if the pattern of growing 1 position per game cycle holds fast, this is the year that we get there with Malta. Now, the downside, of course, is that Malta starts ludicrously low in the rankings, and that is going to make those early years and the first probably decade of the save an awful lot more difficult for us, which is fine because of some of the other things that we're going to talk about later. Yeah, it's that time in the video where I say that, I don't know, 110% of you are currently not subscribed to the channel or something like that, and if you aren't, consider doing so. We got the recaps of this and all sorts of mad stuff coming up soon because we've discovered some stuff in the editor that's new this year that is going to make some of those videos I made last year look like a cakewalk. So thanks in advance. Switching back to the current year. One of the key factors that's important when deciding to do a save like this is choosing the nation and the club. Ideally, you're going to want a league that has quite relaxed rules around the registration of foreign players. We'll get back to why that is exactly in a minute, which is why Hungary is such a fantastic starter one, because there's basically no rules there. Poland is also quite relaxed. Ireland has basically no rules either, and Austria if you want to start a little bit further up too. However, if you know a little bit about the pre-game editor and you have your heart set on doing a certain country, then frankly, don't be afraid to just go in and change the rules a little bit on the squad registration to make that a bit more fun, because at the end of the day, it's a video game, and the ultimate goal should always be to have the most fun. If you are unsure about the rules of some leagues before you start and you want to find out some more information, just start up a test save, load a few leagues that you like, go over to their profile pages and look under the rules tab. Most of the stuff you're going to be interested in is going to be up here, most likely. Occasionally there'll be further stuff down here, but it is worth taking a little look at this sort of stuff. It's also possibly worth taking over a club and having a look at some of the individual match day rules too, because sometimes there are little hidden things that don't seem to appear in here too, so just cover all your bases. So you've chosen your nation, and it is now time to choose the club which you want to manage. Now, personally, I would avoid taking over any of the top clubs from the nation that you've chosen. The main logic behind this is that those are the teams that you are really going to need to help you later in the save, and by taking over one of them, you're essentially jumping straight to the top table yourself, rather than going down into the second division, grabbing a club, dragging them up the leagues, and essentially pulling another chair up to the table to add to the number of people sitting at it. This table analogy has gone... well, it's gone on too long. But you understand what I mean, especially as they're likely to have the best reputation and facilities in that nation already, and that's the sort of thing that's going to very much help you later down the line when you are playing in Europe with those teams. So generally speaking, I like to choose a second tier side from the nation I'm going to be managing in. So last year, of course, we chose MTK because technically they were a second tier side at the time. We were able to bring them back up and then establish ourselves with the others. If you are managing in one of the really smaller nations, such as we are this season in Malta, then don't be afraid to start with a top tier side here. But maybe don't choose one of the very top teams because they'll already have the reputation. That's why we chose Sirens in this case, because they are a sort of bottom half side, predicted to come bottom actually this season in the game apparently. So we have a lot of work to do. So you've got your nation and you've got your club. So are there any best practices that you can invoke to help things along the way? Of course there are. That's why we're here. Ideally, you want to be avoiding signing players off the other teams that are in your division, because of course that will weaken them and then make it harder for them to have success on a European level. At the early stages of a save, it probably doesn't matter too much, but once you're in Europe as well, it would make sense for you to not be signing from them because it's just going to weaken the entire league. A good rule of thumb would be once you're in Europe, basically stop doing it. But this is the reason why you need the relaxed rules around foreign player registration, because that means that a lot of your signings are going to have to come from outside of the country you're currently managing it. There are still moments in your save where it will actually make sense to sign a player from another club in your league, even in the latter stages. And the best example of this that I can think of is, say a club in your league has an insanely good player that you've not given them, nothing like that. They've done it all on their own, but they are clearly going to warrant the attention of massive European sides. In a situation like that, sometimes it actually can be best for you to buy that player off of them, then loan them back there on like a 2-year loan deal as part of the deal, and potentially even keep extending that loan when it begins to expire. But at least that way they stay in the nation. Now in this year's game, the developers have talked about improved transfer AI and squad building, but we really won't know what effects that's going to have until much deeper into any kind of save. But this, in theory, combined with some of the changes we've made to the database itself, should hopefully create a slightly better squad building experience for the teams that we are not managing ourselves. But we'll get back to that again later when we discuss the changelog. So then the question becomes, so how do we truly improve the teams in our league without actually managing any of them? And the answer is a simple one: the loan farm. This has grown and grown and grown in importance over the last couple of game cycles of me doing this types of saves, and it truly is the best way currently anyway, to build up the other teams whilst not managing them. And so I'm going to run you through how to build one. So the short explanation is that the loan farm is just a big group of players that you have specifically to be on loan to other sides in your league. The idea being, of course, that if you can get these high quality young talents out at other clubs in your division, they will then firstly develop at those teams, but it will also mean that as they develop, those teams will then grow in their quality, which means they will then get better results in European competitions. And that, at the end of the day, is the main goal. The best part is that you can just kind of keep extending those loans almost every single season, and some players will just stay there for as long as you want. On my last save, we had players that were literally loaned out the moment they joined us and pretty much stayed out on loan for the rest of their career. An example here is David Boateng, who I think has been on loan here at Halidash for 17 years and has gone from being obviously a small player to being a 145 capped Nigerian international goalkeeper who is genuinely world class, frankly, and has cracked up nearly 500 league appearances for them over that period. The other good thing about a loan farm and having players like this chap here to develop at those clubs is that as those players develop and they get better and better and their CA improves, the perceived squad strength of those teams also, of course, improves with it. And what this means is it becomes easier for those teams to bring in better players on permanent transfers because they essentially have a stronger squad as far as that player is concerned. So it kind of helps on both sides of things. And you're going to want to try to establish the loan farm as soon as physically possible. So any players that you're not using at the start, any older players, anyone like that, any young players, again, that you're not quite using yet, get them on the loan list, get them on the dev list, and start trying to get them some loans. Once things are really up and running for you, and you're starting to get a little bit of cash flow coming in from Europe or prize money or various other things, at that point, I start to sign players in different categories. The first category is players who look crazy good, and the idea is that they come in, they go out on loan for a little bit, and then they develop out on loan, and then you bring them back and integrate them into your first team, but they still benefit the loan farm in the meantime. Now, sometimes those guys actually don't come back because the benefit for them being out on loan and the benefit to the club they're at is far greater than it would be if they were just playing for you as a squad player. A good example of that in the last save is this chap here, Haris Živkovic. And you can see that he's an absolutely mad quality striker that would have been a very, very decent player for our first team at the time. We brought him in, loaned him out to Halidash for many, many seasons. In fact, the only reason he moved there permanently is because he got a major injury, which meant that his loan had to be terminated and they wouldn't extend it, but we were then able to sell him back to them quite cheap. That's a very, very rare thing to be able to do, though. But he was doing far more good for them in Europe by winning stuff for them and improving their squad than he would have been being like our third choice striker. The second category are players that we're fully aware are never going to see the light of day in our first team, but they look like they might just have enough about them that they might be able to do some good for another team who are slightly smaller in our league. And you can sort of see some of these players as they developed over their careers become into these types of guys. Again, I'm just showing you this because we've got long-term examples from my previous save. At this point in the save, we have 107 players out on loan. Admittedly, that's actually a lot down from what it was the previous year, where it was close to 170, including this chap here who was literally on loan all the way up until last season. And were I to have been continuing the save, he would have definitely stayed out on loan. And it's often these sort of mid-range type of players that end up becoming the lifetime loanee type of guys, or at least until they start demanding absolutely horrendous contract demands, and in which case we usually just release them back into the wild, so to speak, or hopefully get picked up by other Hungarian sides in this case. And you might then think, okay, sure, but surely it's just easier to buy some players and then offer them to other clubs in your league completely for free, or even to contribute some of their wages. Yeah, you'd think that, but the AI in FM is extremely suspicious of you doing stuff like that, and it basically just will not go for it. You could offer them an absolutely fantastic player who isn't going to demand much money, and you're even going to pay some of his wages for it, and they will still say no, even if it's completely free. It's just the way the game is. So the loan farm became a much more useful tool because of that situation. Now, that may change this year, but I don't think it will. And the other benefit of the loan farm is it means that they can't then sell that player on in a year for absolutely no money. We have total control of it and can ensure that they keep that player at their club, in their squad, and doing stuff for them. You want to be loaning these types of players out from the moment that they are eligible. So in Hungary, as an example, it is 17, but you will have to check the rules of the league that you're managing in to find information like that. I say this because I know that last year a lot of people were waiting until players were 19 and 20 to try to start that loan farm. It's just not likely to happen. The older the player gets, potentially, the likelihood of them wanting that loan is going to be dropping and dropping and dropping. You want to be getting them on nice little youngster, future prospect, breakthrough prospect type of contracts to try to allow that as well. It is always worth putting a promise when you sign players to find them a loan into that actual contract, but I don't know if it actually does anything, but we just sort of do it as a best practice anyway, just in case it does. And as long as you're actively offering them out, they're not going to complain about you breaking the promise if you can't find them a loan. And I know some of you had issues with actually just getting players out in general, so there are a few ways around that, but I can assure you it can be done, hence the 170 players out on loan. The first thing you want to do when you get a new player in that is going for the loan farm is to add them to the development list. So I can't really show you on any of these players because because everyone's already sorted out like that, but essentially you should be able to right click on the player and add them to the development list. You can also do it on their profile. It'll be under development or it'll be under transfer. I can't actually remember. You can then find that development list in here. You'll notice, of course, ours is absolutely massive. These are all the players that are currently still at the club. The key thing is to make sure that you set the template up on the right hand side here, as this is what your director of football or whoever's in charge of this, might be a loan manager, but like who uses those, will be actually using when offers are coming in for your players. So I always set it to the nation that you're in, set everything else to as low as possible because you don't want the clubs being put off by certain things, and have everything ticked. Well, not everything ticked, everything you can. It's weird that they can play for your parent club in cup matches. That's wild. Different nations will have different rules, so there'll be certain things that are grayed out or not in here depending on where you are. So in Norway, for example, they have a system that players that are loaned out have to be allowed to play against their parent club. We actually brought that system with us to Hungary to make it more difficult for ourselves, so that when we built that loan farm, they could all play against us in the league. We're carrying that same system over into Malta as well, just because it's fun and it makes things way more difficult. So once that's all sorted, you need to go over to the staff responsibility screen over here. Then go down to transfers and contracts and over to offer via transfer room. And you then need to make sure that these settings here essentially match the ones that you had set on your development center screen, and then change things for the other squads as well. But obviously I'm not in charge of that at the moment anyway, so that should be absolutely fine. But you need to make sure that you do both, because I know some people don't do the second step and then get confused by it. Once that's done, you then want to just go to the player's profile that you're trying to find a loan for. This is a 19-year-old Syrian striker here. Go up to transfer and go, where is it? Offer via transfer room in FM24. Then select loan, obviously. Then over to targets. Now I have no idea why this is, but you'd think that by excluding foreign clubs, that would be the best mode of access here. But weirdly, we found it's more successful if you actually go up here and select the country that you're actually trying to send them to instead of excluding all the others. No idea why. So once that's done, offer via transfer room and obviously place on loan list, but he's already there. I use this loan farm view when I'm doing stuff like this, as it shows the players' statuses actually spread out rather than all hinged underneath each other. And believe me, that makes it really easy to see who's on the dev list, listed for loan, and might have loan interest like this chap down here does. And if you're using the skin I'm using, this will automatically be baked into the skin under SYC views, but of course I'll put a link to it in the description just in case you're not. But believe me, it makes things so much easier. And when I'm signing players, I try to give them the longest contracts possible if they're players for the loan farm. So 5-year max and then a 3-year optional extension on top of that too. It might cost you a little bit more up front, but it just saves you negotiating 100 contracts constantly all the time. And you know how tedious that can get. I also find it's important that when a player joins you, if that transfer window is open, which presumably it is because they've just joined you, to immediately, if they're a loan farm player, get them on the dev list, get them on the loan list, get them offered out immediately, as they seem to be more interested in the player the moment that they've joined for some reason. So once you've gone through and you've offered out those players, I know this is an issue you'll run into all the time. It happens to me as well. You'll be like, okay, but why is no one bidding on these players? You'll get a few bids from major clubs as well, I suspect. You definitely will. But you'll be like, surely these guys are prime for it. And the truth is, yes, they are. So once you've had all those rejections, go back into this screen and you'll notice that a good chunk of the players that you just offered out and everybody said no will all of a sudden have wanted symbols on them, like this chap down here does. No idea why this is, but it's just how the game works. At that point, then go through and offer out all those same players again, and miraculously, all of a sudden, there'll be loads of bids on them from those same clubs. It's very strange. No idea why that happens like that. It's almost like the first one just kind of entices them into the idea of bidding, and then the second time they're like, oh, he's actually serious. We can have him. Crack on then, big man. Basically. And when it comes to choosing which club to loan a player to if there's multiple bids, I generally speaking will just accept the one that has the highest squad status, because we do want the player to be playing as much as physically possible. And the reason we set up the dev center and the staff responsibilities the way that we have is that we can then actually just select a load of players, offer them out for loan without having to do the detailed sort of targeting, and then he'll just disregard any offers that are from clubs outside of our league. It just keeps things a little bit simpler. But I always still do it one by one the first time a player joins, just because habit, and I'm weird like that. And simply doing this every single year in conjunction with signing players specifically for this purpose, and over each year you'll slowly but surely build up that loan farm to the enormous numbers that we've seen so far. We actually ended up stack overflowing or whatever the number up here to the point where it was actually saying we had negative players out on loan, because once you go past 128, this screen doesn't know what to do. And at one point in this save last year, we had over 250 players under contract at the club at any one time. But the key thing to note is, because a lot of these players are on absolutely minuscule contracts, they're not taking up a huge amount of your wage budget. You can see here, just as an example of where we're at, obviously this is massive into the future, 57 guys on future prospect contracts, £707,000 a week. That's a lot, but we have a £4 million a week wage budget, and a further 69 guys, nice, on youngster contracts, only earning a combined £61,000 a week. That's less than £1,000 a week per player for those types of guys. That's over 100 players just right there that are just loan farmable. And at one point it was even higher than that. And we're still £1 million a week under our wage budget at this stage. So if you scale it correctly, it's still going to be financially viable. Once you've got a load of players out on loan, the next step is trying to keep them out on loan, which sometimes is pretty straightforward, but occasionally there are some banana skins that you can slip over. So every year, about 2 weeks before the loans expire, which is usually, if you're in Hungary anyway, or most European leagues, the 30th of June, you'll get an email basically in the inbox which will say, do you want to extend these loans? And just a massive list. There's no way to extend them all at once, because reasons. I still don't know why. It's mad to me. And the screen is glitchy as all hell. Luckily, there is a better way. But the best course of action is actually to go back to the development center and back to the screen I showed you earlier and actually do it from here. Now, normally I have a different view that I use in here, but obviously this has been ported over, so the view's no longer active in the game. But I'd add things like the loan expiry date, the contract expiry date, various things like that, the club they're at, just so you get an idea. But the point being is you can actually propose loan extensions from this screen. I think it's just over a month or just under a month before those loans expire, which gives you 2 weeks further for them to actually accept it and for less stuff to go wrong. But one other key feature, and two, it's just kind of easier to do it from here. Just click on the player, go into transfer and go propose loan extension. The best part about this screen, and the reason that this is the definitely best way to do this, is because of something we stumbled on completely by accident last year. And that is that presuming the loans finish on the 30th of June, which again, for most European leagues, that is exactly how it works. It's not always the case around the world, so you will have to sort of manipulate this based on the numbers I'm going to give you. We found that if you offered players out in the same way that we were already doing with the proposed loan extension when they were already on loan, on the 2nd of June, if you propose that loan extension, with the first action of that day, for some reason, the game will default to a 2-year loan extension rather than a 1, which is something you can offer, but it seems to get grayed out by the clubs a lot of the time when you try to do it manually. It's really kind of weird. This way, the players get 2-year loan extensions instead of 1, and that's a lot of admin that you're not going to have to do if you can double up the number of loans, or not the loans, but the length of loans. It also gives you more security in case one of the really good players gets an injury right at the end of when that year would be expiring. Now they won't just send them straight back to you, they'll rehab them and bring them back into their team, because that's how a lot of players end up coming back, because they get injured at the wrong time. And to me, it seems like it's 28 days before the expiry of the loan contract, so take that 28-day number into other leagues with different expiry dates, and it should maybe work. I just don't know though. The way I remind myself of this is I actually just will randomly go in and set a note in the game for a reminder on the 1st of June every single year to remind myself to do this. The reason I do it on the 1st instead of the 2nd is because if you do it on the 2nd, the note comes through too late in the day, and I think it can still work on the 2nd later in the day, but it won't tell you that it's going to be a 2-year loan. It just will be a 2-year loan. It's really, really strange. Out of interest, if you want to sort that out, if you got a notebook on your profile, and then you can create notes in here, and you can see I've got one that says do the 2-year loans. So using all of that information, you should in theory be able to get a pretty comprehensive loan farm slowly starting to build up over many years of the save, and more importantly, it should be relatively easy to manage, and you shouldn't have too many issues with players coming back from loan. It will still happen. We lose a big chunk, like a nice chunk every year, but they're always just replaced with new guys, and a lot of the guys that come back just go out on loan to different clubs as well. Not always once they pass a certain age, but mostly. But if you are struggling to find a loan for a player, it is still worth every day or two checking in on this screen, because sometimes wanted symbols will just pop up for a day completely at random and then just disappear. And if you can get them while they're there, then you'll most likely get that loan sorted. Now, those AI transfers and squad building improvements that are allegedly in FM24 could actually throw some spanners in the work for this year, because it might mean that clubs will be less likely to take your loans because they think that they don't actually need that player, even when they probably do, because they're probably going to be an absolute world-beating player, but that's just how life goes. On the other hand, though, it might mean that they'll be more active and building better squads by themselves, so that loan farm might actually be less useful this year, but not because the game gets worse overall. It just means that you don't have to do so much micromanagement. There's one other pitfall with the loan farm, and that is that if a team loses their manager right as you're coming up to that loan extension date, and they do not currently have a manager in charge, you are in trouble, my friend, because they simply will say no to every single loan extension offer that you give them until they have a manager in place, and most of the time they're pretty slow at doing that, and this has had some huge effects in the past for me. Last year we actually managed to dodge it happening, not once in the entire save, but back in the Irish save, Sligo Rovers lost their manager at the wrong time of the year. They sent back 15 loan players and eventually had only 5 senior players at their club. And it was just not pretty. The worst thing as well is even when they do get a new manager, they won't take any of those same players back on loan, but they will still bid on other ones of your players to go out on loan. FM is weird sometimes, man. And you need patience to do a save like this. This is not something that you're going to be able to do in a couple of seasons. These are very much long-term, entire cycle type challenges. To give you an idea, the Tromsø save we did in Norway to get them to 4th was 26 seasons. The one we did with Treaty United to get them to 3rd was 32 seasons. And last year, this save, in fact, I believe was either 27 or 28 seasons. And I suspect Malta could actually surpass them all because the game is just faster this year. Speaking of Malta, let's actually get back to the Malta stuff and talk about that now. I realize this possibly could have been 2 videos, but again, I like to give you value, and I figured we'd keep all the building a nation stuff in one video like this. Because the database that we're going to be using for this save, and I'm currently using right now with FC Sirens, is a little bit special, and that's thanks to God of the community and the editorial brain in a jar, Hadrian, once again, for the unbelievable work he's done on this. Firstly, it's obviously special because Malta isn't in the base game, so this has had to be built properly properly to mimic that in the first place, but it does have all of the top 3 Maltese divisions in there, as well as the 2 Gozitan divisions as well. These 2 are in here so you can see their fixtures, players and teams, but they're not actually playable leagues, whereas the other 3 divisions are. In theory as well, the teams are actually all playing in the correct stadiums and have their own grounds, which they do as far as I'm aware in real life. It's as close as we could get it, because it literally was a case of Hadrian looking through Google Maps trying to find the stadiums, because in the base game there's only like 12 stadiums and they're all just sharing. But with that stadium thing does come an issue that we'll talk about in a little while, and some ways that we've had to go and fix that with some balancing mechanics. But the difference with this is that we wanted to see what a building a nation save could be like if the game was properly optimized for things to actually scale correctly, which I referenced of course at the start of the video. And that's been one of the biggest bugbears for me about doing these saves over the last few years, is that you'd build your nation up to second in there, you'd be winning Champions Leagues after Champions Leagues, we'd have many teams in your league winning European trophies, and yet the game would sort of still treat you as if you were like a slightly better nation than you were before, but it wouldn't really scale a lot of the most important things along with you, and that kind of draws you back, particularly on the financial side of things. So what I'm now going to do is run you through all the changes that are made in order to aid that goal, and there's some very cool stuff in here. And what I should say though is that some of the stuff in here, and I take no credit for it at all because I did nothing of that, is utterly amazing, and there's some things that you'll probably maybe even want to introduce into your own saves, even if you're not doing a building a nation save, and you'll understand what I mean when we get to it. Now, making a full video about exactly how each individual one of these changes was made was far beyond my knowledge level as far as things to do with the editor, but luckily there's a solution, and that is that if you head over to the Discord, which I will link in the description, we have a special channel called Malta Changelog. Obviously, the moment I'm actually recording this, things are not fully in here, but by the time you see this video, this will have individual guides for how each individual thing that was changed for this was implemented using the the pre-game editor, and it's going to be absolutely fantastic, and the work here that Hadrian's done is genuinely astonishing. So pretty much anything you need to know about how we've done the things we've done for this will be in one of these guides, so do please check that out. So let's now talk about some of the cool stuff that is now in this database, and that frankly makes me so excited to play this, because it's all right. Let's go. Firstly, the new television revenue setup that I referenced right at the start of the video. In all of our tests, this new dynamic TV revenue thing that was introduced into the game this year is essentially just window dressing. It's a case of number go up without really being tied to any variables that truly matter to a long-term save. In the same way that, your social media follower grows, because, remember this screen? So just as an example, say we establish Malta as, I don't know, a top 3 coefficient side over the course of a 25-year period, loads of Champions Leagues, other Maltese sides winning stuff constantly, huge players signing, huge sales, all that jazz. The game would just simply not care, and it would just kind of go up by an arbitrary amount, and you'd still be earning basically peanuts in terms of television revenue at that point. And it is this lack of scaling across several different facets of the game that has been the biggest problem, and that's what we've aimed to fix with this database. Like, I'd never expect that even if you reach number 1 for a sustained period of time, that you could ever get revenues, or should ever get revenues, that would rival that of the Premier League, because that is just on a different planet. But you'd expect to at least be getting revenues up to a sort of a range of the clubs or nations just below that, your Spains, Italy, France, if they could even sell their television revenue, and Germany, who are admittedly a little bit higher. You'd like to at least be starting to get into that ballpark if you did it over a long enough period of time. So what our version of the TV revenue deal does is this. It grants television revenue for every match that is chosen for television in a way that you'll seen in many leagues, and especially in European competitions throughout the game. Not particularly unusual there, but it's the way that it calculates that revenue. So in this example here, you'll see that every game is televised. They're actually not. It's just that once you start to progress towards the fixtures, games will be chosen for television in the same way that they are in England, where certain matches are in blackout, certain games are moved and then chosen for different times of the day to be shown on television. You know the drill. But the short version is that it takes the reputation of the 2 clubs involved in the fixture, and those reputations are rated between 0 and 10,000. Manchester City are starting, I think, at 9,400. Sirens in this case start at 1,800, so there's a huge disparity there. It then adds those 2 numbers together to get a sort of a reputation figure for the match. It then looks that number up in a table of predetermined values set by the editor before the save to assign how much money is generated in revenue for that match, and each team then splits the money 50-50, and that money is then credited to the teams when the match happens. Like, technically, if 2 teams were, for example, both 10,000 reputation in the game, which again is never going to happen in this save or anything like that, technically they could earn millions for a TV revenue match. And so you don't find yourself in a position where you've got the second best league in Europe, but your TV revenue is still lagging behind in like 40th place, and therefore completely crippling you financially. The original TV deal system is actually still active in the background, as it can't really be removed, but as you progress, you'll basically notice nothing from it anyway, because the numbers won't really change a great deal by very small amounts anyway. You'll only really see it when occasionally you'll see like some money allocated to you at the start of a season, but it will be like 10 grand or something like that. It's important to note that these changes have only been made to the Maltese league in this setup of the database. Obviously, if you want to imply these stuff to your own saves, then you'd have to edit that yourself. But again, all of that stuff is linked in the Discord. Next thing that I already sort of alluded to this is that matches will now be moved for television in the same way that they are in many other nations. You'll see here, there's some 4:30 kickoffs on the Sunday here, 2 o'clock on a Sunday, 7:30 on a Wednesday. That's kind of normal stuff, an early kickoff on a Saturday and whatnot. But the TV matches are also split from the leagues, meaning that the second tier actually gets 2 televised games a week, and the third tier actually gets a televised game a week as well, just to give a little bit of trickle down money into some of the lower tiers. Now, obviously, they'll be paid peanuts because their reputations are so low, but it just gives them an opportunity. And the last thing is that in the cup as well, it's prioritizing giant killer matches potentially, which means there actually is an opportunity for smaller sides to get even more TV revenue if they're playing against the big side, because the big side's reputation will drive the price of the TV revenue up. A lot of them have very small seating capacities and are just very small stadiums in general. Now, this isn't actually an issue in the way we've set things up. You can see that the minimum capacity is like 250 for the top flight, the second tier again 250. It's very, very small stadiums. However, Football Manager has other ideas. For some reason, the game does not like teams playing in stadiums that are 5k or less, essentially. And the problem is that it will basically force them to build new stadiums within the first few years at the start of a save if they're playing in stadiums that are too small. Even though they're not for the league we're playing in, but the game just decides that they are. The problem with that, though, is that they end up going into massive debts in order to build those sort of automatically built stadiums, and it puts them in a huge financially crippling situation. And so the only way around that was to have a slightly higher bump in the finances in the first couple of seasons to sort of offset that, so at the very least, once they've destroyed themselves, they'll at least be sort of back to square one. It was getting so bad that clubs were like fire selling all their facilities off, going into administration, scrapping their youth systems, all that sort of jazz, just because they needed to build a new stadium for no reason. But that's actually a game thing and not something we can control. Prize money for the league has also been adjusted in a similar way, so that will of course also scale with you as you go up. For some reason, it doesn't always do that in certain saves. We found that if you actually go into the editor, remove the current figures that are set for the prize money, and then put the exact same figures back into it, then use that database, it does seem to actually scale it better. We don't know why, but it does. So maybe potentially try that out if you find that to be a problem. Same thing has also been applied to sponsorships. So now the sponsorships should also scale as the clubs and the league improve with it. Like last year, we had the best ranked club in literally the whole world in terms of reputation, but we probably wouldn't have even been top 100 in terms of the sponsorship we were getting. And it's not like our league wasn't good either, you know. Player values in smaller leagues are also quite a bugbear for a lot of people too. That has also been fixed in this save, so that if you do get well-beater players as you get later into your save, they will actually start to have values that match what they would actually be worth if your club is at the level that they should be at that point. But on the flip side of that is that the wages have also been adjusted using the same logic. So essentially, you're not going to be able to keep your squad on tiny wages, even if they've got 190 PA or anything like that. They're going to demand top dollar if they're a top player. And that's just another way of balancing things out a little bit, because it would be just unfair if you could offer them tiny wages while selling them for moon money, you know, particularly with the Saudi influence and clubs coming in and buying your players for God knows how much. So we needed to make it a bit more difficult on the wages side of things too. Dynamic transfer deadline day is now in this save. It's been brought to Malta, and that is just very cool because it's a very cool feature and it's missing from a lot of leagues. But the other reason it's cool is that we've noticed that if you don't have that on in a league, it tends to just lead to less transfers happening. We've done so many tests that show this, that having it on seems to just create more transfers because the game is just trying to fill it up with stuff. So that's just a better way of having more activity in the save. So now we have that in Malta as well. That's a really strange and quite difficult one to do, but it is in the Discord again with the rest of the guides. We have the Norwegian loan system, which I talked about earlier, where players are forced to be able to play against their parent club. Not an issue there. That's just the thing to make it harder for us. There are youth leagues that mirror the top 2 divisions as well. That's all very kind of straightforward stuff. It's just so that the youngsters have somewhere to play and actually get to play in proper divisions. If your club gets relegated from the top flight, so does your youth team. You know the drill. Nation and content preferences for transfers have also been adjusted slightly so that they now, instead of having no preferences at all, they have every preference but for all the continents, and it just means that there's just more variety of different transfers that come in. It sort of does the opposite of last time where they had no preferences. Now they just prefer everybody, and it just seems to be more fun that way. The last sort of big change to the database, there are obviously a lot of more smaller ones which aren't really worth discussing here, but they're still great, is the professionalism setup. And so basically, due to the fact that no matter how much money a lot of the clubs seem to earn, they would never turn professional when they were semi-pro at the start of the save, this presented some problems for us. And the original plan was to have them essentially all be professional in order to sort of assuage that, but the problem is that just felt completely unrealistic. Not that we care too much about realism, look at the other things, but we had to draw the line somewhere. But it also meant that teams in the third tier were trying to offer professional contracts because they were a professional team, and it was just driving them into stupid amounts of debt no matter what you did, for obvious reasons. And the fix for this is that when teams are promoted to the top flight in Malta, they then turn professional, in the same way that happens when you join the Football League in England if you're not already pro at that stage. It sort of forces the teams to do it. And on the flip side of things, if a team is relegated from the top flight, they then have a 3-year window either to get promoted back to the top flight or to turn back to semi-professional again, and that sort of saves removes any kind of issues with their wage structure and things like that, and it keeps things nice and fair. Really cool system, and it just balances the finances a little bit better. And the reason all this financial balancing had to be done as well is because there's some new mechanics in the game this year that basically cause horrendous things for clubs that even go into the tiniest amount of debt, and it could just destroy a save basically and make everything a little bit silly. Not that it's not silly in some places, I grant you, but again, fun. Right then, I know that was quite a long video, but I have tried to cover every single possible thing I could in this. And again, if there's any more questions, ask in the Discord, and obviously seek those guides. They're very, 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 very good. I'm chomping at the bit to get started properly with this Siren save, and I hope you guys are as well. So join me over on stream after this video. Right now, God knows what we're up to, getting things started with Sirens. And if not, don't worry, I'll see you guys in the yearly recap videos as well. So like, subscribe, all that lovely jazz, and hold your gun. Capybara, bye-bye.